The New York Knicks. I don't talk much about the New York Knicks on this channel because, to be perfectly honest with you, the New York Knicks have been irrelevant for 2 decades pretty much. I know that's weird, I know that's odd to say about a team that is located in the mecca of basketball and plays in Madison Square Garden, but the only time that I've mentioned the Knicks the past year that I've been doing this channel is when their owner, James Dolan, does something stupid. Very rarely have I talked about Knicks basketball on the court. It's mostly the antics of their owner that I talk about. The Knicks have been the laughingstock of the NBA for 20 years now. They have won 1 playoff series since 2000. Just 5 playoff appearances the last 20 years. And the bulk of those playoff appearances were in the Carmelo Anthony era, where the Knicks were consistently getting bounced in the first round. The Knicks' record of 643 and 965 the last 20 years is one of the worst in the NBA. 10 seasons with 50 or more losses. There are a lot of problems with the Knicks as an organization. Ownership being one of the main issues. James Dolan is the worst owner in all of professional sports. There's not a question about it. Not just the NBA, all professional sports. But there's nothing we can do about James Dolan. There's nothing we can do about ownership for the Knicks. So if you're a Knicks fan, you are stuck with James Dolan. I hate to tell you that. But another problem that the Knicks have had has been coaching. The Knicks have made some god-awful coaching hires. How can you expect a team to win with guys like David Fizdale, Jeff Hornacek, Mike Woodson, Herb Williams, guys like that? How can you win with those type of coaches coaching your team? We are talking about the New York Knicks. This is not the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Atlanta Hawks. This is the New York Knicks. This is an organization that should be hiring coaches with pedigree. The last 10 years, the only coach the Knicks have hired that has had any pedigree whatsoever has been Mike D'Antoni, a coach who has won everywhere that he has been, except, of course, with the Knicks. His time in New York was a disaster. So Mike D'Antoni has been really the only coach in New York the past 10 or so years that has any pedigree, any name value to him. But that all changed over the weekend. For the first time since Mike D'Antoni, James Dolan and the Knicks actually hired a head coach with some name value. Tom Thibodeau was hired by the Knicks over the weekend. This is really the first time in a decade that Knicks fans appear to be happy about a coaching hire. So, all the problems with the Knicks, they're fixed now, right? I mean, Tom Thibodeau, he has had success in the NBA. He was successful in Chicago. He's going to step in, be the drill sergeant that he is, whip these young players into shape, and the Knicks should be respected as an organization again, right? Right? I don't know about that. I'm not really sure how I feel about the Knicks hiring Tom Thibodeau, but I'm not really digging this hire, at least on the surface. When you think about Tom Thibodeau, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Defense. People associate Tom Thibodeau with being a mastermind defensively. He designed the defense on those Celtics teams that made 2 finals appearances in 3 years, won a championship back in 2008. That ended up getting him hired in Chicago with the Bulls. He continued his defensive dominance in Chicago. The league, it seemed, could not break his defensive system. The Bulls had the best defensive rating in the NBA his first 2 years in Chicago. They were ranked in the top 10 defensively his first 4 years. But then things in the NBA began to change. The Golden State Warriors happened, and the landscape of the NBA changed, which made Tom Thibodeau's defensive system ineffective, to be honest. See, his system is designed to force teams into taking low percentage 2-point shots. The problem is the league has transitioned into a 3-point league. Offenses now are centered around creating space, running the pick and roll in the middle of the court instead of on the side or the baseline, which was how offenses in the NBA operated for years. Once this change happened, Tom Thibodeau's defense became ineffective. I think another part of it, too, was that the league figured out how to break his defensive system. This happens in the NFL all the time. You remember Rex Ryan? For years, from his time in Baltimore to his time in New York with the Jets, Rex Ryan had some of the best defenses in the NFL. But eventually, teams started to figure it out. Rex Ryan failed to adjust to it. And the next thing you know, he's out of the league and he's a talking head on ESPN. That is what happened to Tom Thibodeau. The game changed in the NBA. And he just didn't change with the times. All you got to do is look at his time in Minnesota for proof of that point. He inherited a bad defensive team in Minnesota. And there was no improvement throughout his tenure. None. 2016, 2017, his first season in Minnesota, they were 27th in defensive rating. Very next year, 24th in defensive rating. And of course, he was fired midway through the 2018-19 season. His time in Minnesota actually brings up another concern I have with Tom Thibodeau heading to New York. The Knicks are a young team. This is one of the youngest teams in the NBA. This team needs a coach that can develop the R.J. Barretts, the Mitchell Robinsons, and the eventual first-round pick that the Knicks are going to get in this year's draft. The Knicks have a 37% chance to land a top 4 pick in this year's lottery. So this is a young team in New York that needs a head coach that can develop these young players. Something that isn't exactly a strong suit for Tom Thibodeau. This is new territory for him. But he developed Derrick Rose. Did he? Did he? I mean, did he really have that big of an impact on Derrick Rose? That's like saying Paul Silas developed LeBron James. You don't really develop superstar level players. You just maintain them and let them flourish. But I don't want to take any credit away from him. I don't want to take credit away from Tom Thibodeau. So let's just say that he had a huge impact on the development of Derrick Rose. Tell me, who else has he developed? What other rookies or young players has he developed? Just look at what happened in Minnesota. He inherited a young team in Minnesota, just like he's doing now in New York. He had Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn. They go 31-51 in his first year. They were terrible. What happened next? He goes back to what he is comfortable coaching. Veterans. He trades Zach LaVine to Chicago, where Zach LaVine ends up flourishing. Traded Chris Dunn to the Bulls too. Got Jimmy Butler in return. At the time, it was looked at as a great trade. Now, of course, we all know how that ended. Jimmy Butler forced his way out of Minnesota, and Tom Thibodeau was fired. His second time being fired in just 5 years. Throughout his years as a head coach, Tom Thibodeau has devoted just 4.9% of playing time to rookie players. That is 5th lowest in the past 10 years in the NBA. Now, obviously, that is all about to change in New York. But another thing that concerns me, Tom Thibodeau is notoriously tough on his players. Like I said earlier, he is like a drill sergeant. He is not the coach that is going to be having beers with players after practice or in the locker room. Now, sometimes that style can work. Oftentimes in the NBA, it doesn't, especially when it comes to these young millennial players. Remember the battles between Stan Van Gundy and Dwight Howard in Orlando? What was a young Dwight Howard's biggest gripe with Stan Van Gundy? He was too tough on him. He was constantly yelling at him during games. Now, oddly enough, that is exactly what Dwight Howard needed. He hasn't been the same player since Stan Van Gundy coached him. He has not been the same player since he left Orlando. But a lot of NBA players don't like that militaristic style of coaching, just like Dwight Howard didn't like it. It can work well in the NFL. It just doesn't work as well in the NBA. So I am not so sure that the Knicks are a great situation for Tom Thibodeau. Bringing in a coach that prefers to coach veterans to a team full of rookies and young players. And his coaching legacy depends on how well he does in New York. Make no mistake about it. His legacy is riding on this job with the Knicks. If he can develop R.J. Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, breathe some signs of life into this struggling franchise, the Knicks will not have trouble attracting free agents. I mean, they're playing in one of the biggest media markets in the world. It's not hard to convince NBA players to come play in New York City, to come play in Madison Square Garden. As long as the team is winning, as long as they are not an embarrassment like they have been for most of the last 20 years. The good news for Tom Thibodeau, he is heading into a situation where there's nowhere to go but up. It cannot get any worse for the New York Knicks. I mean, if he wins 35 games next year, it will be looked at as a major success. The Knicks haven't won 35 plus games since the 2013-14 season. But if he fails in New York, he will be looked at as a guy that dominated the NBA short term with his defensive schemes, but failed to change with the times. He'll be like a one-hit wonder. If he fails with the Knicks, his NBA head coaching career is over. All right, that's all for today. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button for me. Click the notification bell to receive all updates from the channel. Appreciate you guys that have already done so. Leave me a comment in the section below. Is Tom Thibodeau the right coaching hire for the New York Knicks? Let me know what you think about this. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. If you have any questions, a topic that you would like me to cover, you can email me at BTLKC84@gmail.com. I'll see you guys next time.